Hello, cohort. I hope that you are all having a great week. For our Leadership in Higher Education course, I studied the contingency theory. And in today's presentation, I will start with just a brief overview of the theory. Then we'll discuss some of the specific details involved with the theory. From there, I will share with you what I found to be the best organizational frame for the contingency theory. I will then discuss how change operates within the theory, and will conclude by discussing how the contingency theory contributes to higher education. As we know, there are various leadership theories and models in existence. The contingency theory was developed by psychologist Fred Fiedler in the 1960s. And previous to this time, leadership models were either based on the necessary traits or on the behaviors of a leader, whereas Fiedler was the first to develop a theory that considered both a person's traits and the situational variables that were involved. And Nordhaus, in his book, when describing the contingency theory, he says that it is a leader-match theory. And in defining that, he says that effective leadership is contingent on matching a leader's style to the right setting. So ultimately, Fiedler believed that a leader would operate best when their leadership style was matched to the appropriate situations within the workplace. Fiedler determined that leaders were either task-motivated or relationship-motivated. And this was determined by using a tool that he developed known as the Least Preferred Coworker Scale, which I will refer to as the LPC scale. And those that were task motivated were concerned with meeting goals, whereas those that were relationship motivated are concerned with maintaining positive relationships. And the LPC scale is administered as a questionnaire. And respondents are asked to describe a colleague that they have least preferred working with by using 16 bipolar adjectives on a scale from 1 to 8. And you can see the scale and the image here on the right. Based on the calculations of the scale, if your score was 57 or below, you would be considered a low LPC and are thus task motivated. With a score of 64 or above, you have a high LPC and are thus considered relationship motivated. Or if your score falls between 58 and 63, you have a middle LPC and are determined to be a socio-independent leader. These individuals are considered self-directed and not overly concerned with the task or the relationships. And in my research, the middle LPCs were not spoken of often, so I will not contribute much information concerning these particular individuals. As already mentioned, Fiedler believed that a leader would thrive best when their style was matched to the appropriate situation. But in order to determine this, there are some situational variables that must be considered. The first is leader-member relations, which is the level of confidence and respect that followers have for the leader. Next is task structure, or the degree to which the requirements of a task are clear. And last is position power, or the amount of authority a leader has over his or her followers. So you'll see, based on the chart on the right here, that Fiedler determined 8 different situations based on the combination of these variables, and determined that low LPCs, or those who are task motivated, will be most effective in very favorable or very unfavorable conditions, whereas high LPCs, those that are relationship motivated, will be most effective in the moderately favorable conditions. And although the research on this isn't extremely clear, some would conclude that low LPCs are most efficient in extreme situations, so either end of this spectrum, because in these situations they are able to exert great control over the situation at play. Whereas high LPCs, those that are relationship motivated, operate best in the moderately favorable conditions, because in these situations they don't have to possess a great amount of control and thus can focus more on the relationships. I would like to address just a couple of strengths and limitations of the contingency theory. There are certainly more beyond those listed here, but I'm going to focus on just a couple. I would say one of the greatest strengths of the contingency theory is that it does not ask too much of leaders. If a situation is not favorable for a particular leader, Fiedler would argue that the variable should be altered until the fit is achieved. So a leader can maybe operate at peace, knowing that if they don't feel that they are effective in a certain situation, or if they feel that they are struggling in a certain situation, it may simply be that their leadership style is not a great match for the task at hand, and they either need to find a new leader for that particular role or just adjust the variables until fit is achieved. Also, the contingency theory is supported by empirical research. There have been numerous studies done throughout the decades since the 1960s that validate Fiedler's theory. One limitation of the contingency theory is the lack of direct measures for situational variables. So although the situational variables are valuable, there is no specific way to measure these variables. Fiedler did not outline how to go about doing that. There was no tool developed for this piece of his theory. There are also multiple criticisms concerning the LPC scale. Some would argue that the instructions for the scale are not clear. And Nordhaus, in his book on leadership, says that it does not make sense on the surface to measure your style through your evaluations of another person's style. So some would argue that the scale itself may be ineffective in order to determine an individual's leadership style. Through my research, I determined that the contingency theory was most consistent with the human resource frame. And the human resource frame, like the contingency theory, both have a high value for considering the needs and skills of the individuals involved within the organization. The human resource frame argues that when a good fit is found between a leader and their position, both the organization and the individual will benefit. And this belief falls quite consistent with the contingency theory that would also argue that when a leader is in a good match to their position, that leader will thrive within their role, thus the organization will benefit. Also, the human resource frame is concerned with finding balance between human needs and formal roles. The contingency theory also operates out of this belief through the LPC scale. This scale determines the leadership style of an individual, thus determining the needs and preferences of a person, in which you can then match them to a formal role that is best fit for that individual. As already mentioned, both the human resource frame and the contingency theory do have a high value for the relationships involved within an organization. The contingency theory focuses specifically on the leader-member relationship, which is also a high value of the human resource frame, wanting to ensure that relationships are healthy within the organization. Fiedler also believed that organizations should engineer the job to fit the manager. This just reiterates wanting to consider the needs and skills of a particular individual. The human resource frame also values considering the needs of an organization's employees, so engineering the job to fit the manager. If that principle is being followed, then one can ensure that its employees will be more productive, motivated, and committed to the organization. When considering change within the contingency theory, I concluded that this theory would operate best through the human resource frame or the structural frame when facilitating change. I think one can conclude that the contingency theory was designed for change, considering that Fiedler believed that variables should be changed in order to meet the specific leadership style of any given individual. Facilitating change through the human resource frame would work particularly well for those that are relationship motivated, considering that they would want to involve their followers in order to maintain those healthy relationships. The human resource frame approaches change through participation and involvement and through soliciting input from other colleagues, followers, etc. So as a leader who is relationship motivated, it would be easy to consider change or view change through the human resource frame, as both relationship motivated leaders and the human resource frame are focused on the skills and needs of people. However, I found that those that are task motivated may want to facilitate change through the structural frame, as this frame operates with an understanding or belief in realignment and renegotiation, and with the contingency theory believing that there must at times be a realignment of variables in order to meet the needs of leaders. I think those that are task motivated, wanting to fulfill the goals of their organization, would be comfortable with the framework of the structural frame, wanting to ensure that they align the structure of their organization to the culture that is taking place. The contingency theory contributes to change in a couple of ways. First of all, the contingency theory is considered predictive, meaning that it provides useful information regarding what type of leadership is most effective in various situations. Thus, leaders within an organization can feel more prepared for change, and that they will understand in which situations leaders will do well and in which situations leaders may struggle. Therefore, they can adjust variables accordingly or acknowledge that leaders will thrive within change if the situation is still a fit to the leadership style. Also, Fiedler encouraged change in the sense that he proposed that variables should be adjusted until fit is achieved. Thus, the contingency theory is a good theory to consider when needing to utilize change in an organization. However, barriers to change, the first being that yes, although there is an encouragement to adjust variables, Fiedler did not provide great instruction on how to do so. So this may be a piece of the theory that is easier said than done. Although change is encouraged, there are not clear instructions on how to pursue those types of changes. Also, with leaders who are either relationship motivated or task motivated, there's a sense of complexity involved in this theory. Thus, when it comes to change, there are many things to consider, many variables to consider, which only further complicates the already complicated process of change. Although my research did not specifically address how the contingency theory contributes to higher education, I would like to conclude with some of my own personal conclusions on how the contingency theory could be used in higher ed. As a leader in higher education, I believe that someone operating under the contingency theory might want to determine how to best utilize employees based on their leadership style and the situational variables involved in their particular department. I think by acknowledging the belief that when fit is achieved, employees will be more motivated and committed, leaders in higher education can be more intentional in how they hire and where they place employees, as certainly institutions of higher education desire that employees be very motivated and committed to the organization. As for someone hiring student leaders, they might consider how each individual student leads by determining the leadership style through the LPC scale. Once determining this, they can consider under what circumstances these leaders will best operate, and thus can either encourage the student to pursue certain opportunities on campus or place them in positions in which they believe they will thrive. When working with a team of leaders, the leader operating within the contingency theory can assign tasks based on the leadership style of each individual team member. So as a resident director myself, it would be helpful to consider how each of my RAs operate, whether they are task motivated or relationship motivated. This would then help me determine what roles, what duties I might assign to my RAs when programming or just when operating within their leadership roles. And lastly, these are the references used to prepare this presentation, but also to write the various papers that we presented throughout the past 8 weeks. Thank you for listening.